On today's episode of Uncommon Sense, I speak with Christopher Check, the president of Catholic Answers, about what he's up to in his apostolate and his upcoming talk at the Chesterton conference this summer. Well, hello again, viewers and listeners. Welcome to another episode of Uncommon Sense, the official podcast of the Society of G.K. Chesterton. I'm Joe Grabowski, the Vice President for Evangelization here at the Society, and I'm joined by our good friend Christopher Check from Catholic Answers. Hi, Chris.
Joe, thanks for having me back. It's good to see you.
Good to see you as well. It's always a pleasure to get to speak with you, and I love it when our paths cross.
We need to get you out to Southern California again.
I would love it, yeah, especially now as we're recording this, the weather is definitely an appealing factor out there compared to what I have here outside of Philadelphia. So we're having on, as the viewers know, guests that are speaking at the summer's conference, and we're kind of getting them to tease a little bit about the content of what they'll be speaking about. But before we get into that conversation with you, how about you just fill in the viewers and listeners about what's going on at Catholic Answers? If you have anything that you'd like to highlight, I know it's a very busy apostolate and doing very admirable work. So why don't you share some of what you're doing with the listeners?
Sure, and grateful for the opportunity. We're leaning very heavily into the growth of our podcasts, especially Joe Heschmeyer's Shameless Popery, and of course Trent Horn's Council of Trent, which now I think has something close to 220,000 subscribers on his YouTube channel. YouTube is just one of these funny phenomenons, and Joe, you understand this thing better than I do, but YouTube is viewed more than all the other video platforms combined. It's just that's where everyone is, as they say, and so we're putting a great deal of effort and making sure that not only we have the forward-facing talent in guys like Trent and Joe. And Jimmy Akin we're bringing up with a whole new podcast himself as well, apart from his mysterious world. But also, the right editors and the people who know how to, I'm sorry to say it this way, manipulate the YouTube algorithms and this sort of thing so that we're getting the impressions and the views that we want. And it's effective. It's a very effective form of evangelization. I'm super grateful for the team that I have who have taken the time to understand this technology, because I'm the resident Luddite here. But nonetheless, we're reaching a lot. The press has a brand new book by Andrew Petiprin. I don't know if you ever had him on Uncommon Sense, but you should. Former Anglican or Episcopalian priest, became a Catholic. He does movie reviews for us on Catholic.com. But he just wrote a book called The Church Unboxed, and it's an excellent volume saying that that especially in America, I think we tend to think of the church as a political institution or a social movement, and put it in these categories where, it's one player, as Andrew Willard-Jones says, on like the big field that includes the media and the political institutions. And no, it actually is the institution by which we understand all of these things, if we want to understand them properly. And Steve Weidenkopf just did a new book for us that came out called Canceled, and it's about all the heroes in the history of the church that the modern world has decided are bad people, like Marie Antoinette, for example, who's on the cover, and Constantine and people like that. So the press is doing great work. Catholic.com continues to receive lots of millions of views a month. And we're planning another tour with the Flannel Panel. Cy Kellett and Joe Heschmeyer and I are going on the Rhine River. Next, I'm going to do the Catholic Rhineland, not this May, but May of 26, starting in Amsterdam and then going upriver. And Father Sebastian Walsh from the Norbertines up the road from us is going to serve as our chaplain. So anyone who's interested in that boat, the whole boat is Catholic Answers. We did this before on the Danube. The whole
Hmm.
boat will be Catholic Answers. It's just a lot. It's just a great deal of fun, and visiting some of the most magnificent cathedrals in the world. The Three Kings, Aachen, where Charlemagne, the center of his work, Hildegard of Bingen. There's just so much Catholic history in the Rhineland there. So CatholicCruise.com. That will sell out. So join us. That's a quick snapshot. I could do a commercial for an hour, Joe. So you
Uh,
shouldn't give me too much opportunity.
well, no, I mean we love to promote the great work that everybody's out there doing. Of course, we're hoeing our own row here in the apostolic mission field, but as far as we're concerned, it may 10,000 gardens bloom in that regard
I,
because
I, I couldn't agree
there's so
with you
much to be
more.
done. Yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more in that regard. And one of the things that I find very disedifying, and I'm not saying I see it a lot, but from time to time, you just see what I refer to as turf battles in the vineyard.
Yeah.
And it's just so disedifying. Like, are we here to bring souls to Christ? So I'll just say what I've said 1,000 times. Catholic Answers wants to cooperate with anyone who wants to bring people to the fullness of the truth, to introduce them to the love and mercy of Jesus Christ, to his sacraments, with the goal of getting that person united with God for eternity once he crosses the finish line. So, however we can cooperate, that's what we want to do.
Amen to that. Well, I would encourage our viewers and listeners, you'll find links down in the show notes as well, whether you're watching this on YouTube or accessing it a podcast app. Do go and consider that great content that's coming out. I'm a subscriber to all the podcasts there: Jimmy Akins, Trent Horns, Joe Heschmeyer's, Carla Broussard. So just great content coming out and very edifying. Of course, there's, if anything, the only downside is you don't have time in a week to consume all this great great material. But you
I
pick and
don't.
choose. Yeah, exactly. You look for the content that is most appealing to you and the topics that are most intriguing. And
Can I say one more thing in this regard?
yeah.
One of the things that we don't advertise enough, and I'll mention it because my colleague Cy Kellett is going to be on the program in July, especially to
Hmm.
talk about Walker Percy. When Patrick Coffin left Catholic Answers, and we interviewed for a long time, and I was sitting down with Cy Kellett in my office, and we're having the most magnificent conversation, delightful conversation, and he's explained to me that his degree is in English literature from Boston, and I said, well, what did you do your master's thesis on? And he says, Walker Percy. And I said, you're hired. True story. So Cy, I think, is the most underappreciated interviewer in the Catholic world today. And he has a long form interviews that he does. We don't even have a name for them, but they're up there on our YouTube channel, and they're superb. I mean, he's an interviewer of the quality of like a David Frost, I think. And he just did one with Jacob Imam from New Polity and the College of St. Joseph the Worker, who was out here with us. He's got another one coming out with Jennifer Frey. I recommend all of his interviews. He's a very, very thoughtful interviewer. He doesn't just sit there kind of nod his head, what next?
Yeah.
No, he has very good, it's an actual conversation. They are a real delight.
He's engaged, yeah, and I appreciate Sai so much as well as sort of he's clearly passionate for the true balanced vision of Catholic social justice. That
Yes.
term that so sadly has been co-opted and made into a dirty word by some, but very Chestertonian, I would say, in terms of his approach to the Catholic social teaching and the magisterium on those points. So I always appreciate the conversations that he has, whether it be with you and Joe on the flannel panel or interviewing people like Jacob. So again, viewers, listeners, please do go check that out, and also come this summer to meet both Chris and Cy in person in New Orleans at our conference. Cy, as Chris mentioned, will be speaking about New Orleans Connection, a great author, a great Catholic American writer who was influenced by Chesterton and who kind of worked out of New Orleans as his sort of home base there, Walker Percy.
The
Uh,
most important Catholic novelist in America. And by the way, I'm a huge Paul Horgan fan.
yeah,
So there it is.
yeah. No, I mean, we could. I don't want to steal the thunder from the interview that we're going to
Right.
have with Cy when we get him on the show, because we're going to definitely geek out a little bit about Walker Percy. I have a huge affinity for Percy, and gosh, started back in college. I read the book by Paul Ellie called "The Life You Save May Be Your Own," and it's a 4-part or 4-way biography of Percy, Dorothy Day, Thomas Merton, and Flannery O'Connor. And Paul Ellie's perspective on things is not exactly in line with mine theologically or whatnot in all things. But that's a great book. It's a great introduction to these 4 pivotal figures in Catholicism in the 20th century
I
here
just
in the
wrote it
United
down. I've
States.
never read it.
Yeah, so I do recommend that work. But enough about Percy. We're here to talk about another kind of New Orleans Catholic connection that I imagine, even if those in the audience have seen the interview we did with Joseph Pierce about this poem, I imagine still is a point of unfamiliarity for a lot of the audience. The fate of the Acadian people, which is where we get the word Cajun from. Um, you could imagine that, just pronounce Acadian with a French accent. You can see how that gets truncated into Cajun. Um, so, Chris, you'll be telling us a little bit about the history of this event that forms the basis of Henry Wadsworth, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's poem Evangeline.
Yeah.
Uh, what are you finding in your research as you prepare for the talk?
Yeah, prepare is the word. And I liked how you said at the beginning of the interview we were going to tease this topic because that's about the most I'm going to be able to do. As I myself am learning a great deal. Full disclosure, we were actually sitting in Dale's hotel room in King of Prussia there in July of last year. The troubadours having some coffee and trying to wake up after the previous night's afterglow, and I don't know if Dale or Joseph or I brought it up first, but I mentioned the Acadian uh, what do we kind of displacement anyway,
Mm-hmm.
and and then Joseph mentioned the poem, and we said, "Oh, well, we'll each do a talk on that," and that's kind of how that uh, came to be. It's something that has loomed in my imagination for a while, but that I had a kind of a peripheral sense of, as you say. I think Americans, are largely ignorant of it, and I think in that sense, it's an example of how we're all. I know I am still bound in a lot of ways to the version of American history that we got in elementary school. I grew up in Bethesda, Maryland, very close to Washington D.C., and I think about this a lot because we used to go into the city, into DC, and when you're a kid and you see those monuments, you just think, well, these have sort of always been here. Right? This is like they're just part of the American story. The founding fathers must have put these up. They're just kind of this American myth, and you don't realize that. Oh, well, Woodrow Wilson put a lot of these up to kind of tell create an American mythology. And so in elementary school, we hear about the Pilgrims. We don't really hear very much about Jamestown, although they're a full 14, 15 years ahead of Plymouth Rock. Uh, and what we really hear very little about is the conflict between France and England in the settlement, and I should say really the fight for the Eastern Seaboard,
Mm-hmm.
and what becomes the St. Lawrence Seaway, and then the path into into the middle of the country, um, down the Mississippi River Valley, down to St. Louis. And this is a really, really fraught tale because our side, that is the Americans, and I tell people this a lot, we're really still an extension of the British Empire in a lot of ways, are guilty of well, atrocities, both with respect to the native populations, specifically in terms of manifest destiny and our push westward, but early on in the treatment of the French in Canada. So the story starts before Jamestown, 7 months or 8 months before the Pilgrims set sail. There's an expedition in 1606 that leaves France for Acadia. Acadia is if you're like me and you're really American, kind of the world stops at Maine. So go look at what is today called Nova Scotia, and you realize this is a peninsula that's connected by an isthmus to the mainland of Canada, what is now the province of Quebec. Nova Scotia meaning New Scotland, but it starts out as Acadia. It's the first uh, agricultural settlement on the eastern seaboard. Now, I'm not counting the Mexicans. I mean, excuse me, the Spanish in Mexico or in Florida. But it, like I say, it precedes. It's certainly the first French agricultural colony, and the men and women who settle this place are uh, maybe an Italian map maker originally called this place Arcadia, based on the beautiful region in the Peloponnese in Greece, and that becomes Acadia. Some people think it's Acadie, a Mi'kmaq word, but or an Algonquin word. But in any case, they have in mind uh, a, 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 a version of rural life much like Champagne in France. And this is what they eventually do. They start in Port Royal, and again, take a look at a map. Halifax is on the Atlantic side, and then Port Royal is on the Bay of Fundy side, so the western side of this peninsula. And it's a kind of a slow start. It's a little tough at first, uh, but um, but one of the things that really is very striking is early cooperation and integration with the native population. So the Mi'kmaq, over time, and these things don't happen. If you don't have a written language, for example, much like what the Jesuits are encountering, though not violently, with the Iroquois
Mm-hmm.
up in up north in the St. Lawrence Valley. Um, but in time, you have these natives coming around to Catholicism, and instrumental to this, and you see the same thing with the Spanish in Mexico, is intermarriage, which is a striking contrast with um, the Puritan and even the sort of the Virginian experience with the native population, which finds its ugly expression decades and decades later in Manifest Destiny, but
Mm-hmm.
nonetheless, centuries later. But yeah, so it's a very different kind of thing. It is. I mean, it's quite Chestertonian. It is a rural Catholic uh, colony that tills the land and claims from it over time um, a great harvest. I can keep talking.
Yeah, no, well, I'm spellbound and fascinated, obviously, because it is. My mind is turning in the background just about this time frame in history that we, if we learn anything about it, typically we learn, um, you know, the Protestant version of history first of all, and secondly, we'll maybe learn about how that conflict in the turmoil of of the counter, what's come to be known as the Counter Reformation, plays out in Europe, but you very rarely hear it kind of referenced and associated to this international aspect of what's going on in the colonies and in the New World. And that's an important side of it that I think is well overdue for recovery in our imagination and in our scholarship, just to recognize that uh, that turmoil of the 16th and 17th centuries, it coincided with this expansion to new horizons and new shores, and the turmoil came with it. Came with that
Yeah, no,
expansion.
no, precisely. It coincides. It does more than coincide. It finds expression in the New World,
Hmm.
and and actually even into the 19th century. In some ways, this is a kind of provocative thing to say, I guess. In some ways, you can look at the contest for the Alamo in Texas and see a Protestant Catholic conflict.
Hmm.
Now, if we were talking about the Alamo, I'm going to make the case for Davy Crockett and companions, because even though they're the Protestants in the story, I think they actually have the more Catholic position. But anyway, a separate time. But to your point, this thing, and we're really jumping ahead in the history of the expulsion of the Acadians, it finds its denouement during the French and Indian War. So that is the middle of the 19th century. 1755 is the first of two of these expulsions. And I think 1758 is the second one. Um, but this thing that we know as the French and Indian War that is resolved on the plains of Abraham outside the walls of Quebec with Wolfe and Montcalm, a quick but important battle in American history. Really, this is the war that makes America.
Hmm.
Uh, this thing that we call the French and Indian War is actually the 7 Years' War, which is taking place. It's probably like the First World War.
It's a world war. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's taking place all over Europe. So anyway, that's a long way of my saying to you, you're making a very, very important point that it's critical for us to understand events in America in the context of what was going on in the continent. And in this story of the Acadians, surely there are political rivalries that find violent expression between England and France, but religious rivalries that find expression between Catholics and Protestants. And then also kind of the sort of a fly in the ointment and is France's own uh, unfaithfulness, if you will, in the form of the Huguenots or
Hmm.
Huguenot, however you want to say that, and their uh, treachery or double-sidedness in the story of the Acadians as it evolves. So anyway, it's an involved story. And one of the challenges I look at here, and anytime I try to put together a talk about an event in history, is well, how do I render this so Dale isn't saying you're going over time, but also so that a room full of people are going to be able to follow along. So anyway, that's what I'm puzzling over right now. But they're a magnificent people who reclaim the land. They built salt pans, and they're harvesting salt. They reclaim this land, and they do create a bucolic culture that is integrated with the natives.
Yeah.
And I mean, all this talk of multiculturalism, right? This is a true multiculturalism under Holy Mother Church, fiercely Catholic, devoutly Catholic. And it is their Catholicism, of course, which they cannot abandon when as the next century proceeds from the beginning of the 1600s into the middle of the 1700s, uh, and the authority of this region keeps changing hands, and they're asked to make oaths of loyalty to the King of England. It's their faith that holds them back from reading what the King of England requires. And so, from the English perspective, if you hear their version of events, and so if you read a guy like Francis Parkman, who I love, I mean, as an historian, I think just absolutely one of the greatest historians of all time, and so much fun to read, but deeply a Catholic. He admires very much the Acadians, but nonetheless, he's going to give the English narrative that these people were enemies of the crown because they wouldn't take an oath of loyalty.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, well, it's again a really interesting window into a period of history that I think people may fancy themselves to have an acquaintance with, but again has largely been hidden from. I wasn't taught it in school. I'm sure that most of my contemporaries weren't taught it in school, including this poem by Longfellow, despite the fact that at the time of its publication and a little thereafter, it was a huge success and it was hugely influential and kind of captured the zeitgeist of America. We spoke with Joseph during his interview about how it really became kind of resonant with people as their families were being divided just, in the decade after the publication of the poem with the Civil War here in America, because those kinds of themes of loss and of family division and exile really resonated and came home to people. But it's also, this history is fascinating to me because it's something I don't want to say necessarily unique in America or in the New World, but it's a culture that you still see resonant today. So, like I opened with saying the word Cajun, this is one of the reasons for the marked difference of New Orleans as a city compared to kind of any other place in the United States, arguably, right? That it has this cultural background, these deep roots, and it's very Chestertonian that there's kind of like a built-in pun in history, whether or not Acadia was named Acadia because of Arcadia. Acadia does kind of become Arcadia, right?
yes.
Because it becomes that sort of lost Edenic, antediluvian place that you want to get back to. So,
Yeah,
just a fascinating history.
and your point about Louisiana is a critical one. Louisiana is, I mean, some states have a sense of their identity, I think, more than others. Texas, of course, is one. There's nothing that you can't get in the shape of Texas: earrings, a cutting
Right.
board, an electric guitar, whatever. California has a strong sense of its identity as well. Louisiana really is sui generis. I mean, there's no other state, correct me if I'm wrong, that calls their counties parishes, for example.
I don't think so.
But until into the 60s, probably 70s, there were really a million or so fluent French speakers now I think maybe it's in the 100,000s now. And I think there are cultural efforts in Louisiana to preserve the language of French, and you still see in parts of it street signs in multiple languages. But this culture, this Acadian culture, by a very circuitous route. In fact, when I started doing this research, I thought the Acadians were deliberately exiled to Louisiana by the British. They were not.
Mm-hmm.
That's not in fact how it happened. Come to the talk to find how it happened. But um, but uh, but this culture that was Acadia does find expression in Western Louisiana, but also brings or how can I say, engages new and old elements. So the mingling of cultures, as it was with the Mi'kmaq, or the Algonquins or the Abenaki, now is with uh, 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 you have this Creole culture
Hmm.
that evolves out of it with slaves from the Caribbean who find their way to Louisiana. So another mingling, an authentic mingling of cultures there, like you see in Acadia in the 17th century. This is a very Catholic thing.
It is, yeah, and no,
The Spanish in Mexico,
yeah.
they are determined to intermarry. They have elaborate charts describing interbreeding,
Hmm.
and it's absolute contrast. And I mean, I've said this. Probably people are sick of me hearing say it. Absolute contrast to the Protestant Yankee Protestant notion, which is this land is for us. It's not for the savages. You see this in people like Herman Melville.
Hmm.
Just our goal is keep pushing the brown people towards the Pacific Ocean. Very different in the Catholic experience.
Yeah, it is, and the the melting pot idea. This is something that uh, so we should make clear too that Chesterton doesn't seem to comment on this, at least in my research. Now Dale will come up with 30 references that somehow I don't know about. I'm sure, but in my research, I have not found Chesterton to sort of comment on this. He, of course, didn't visit New Orleans. He wasn't able to encounter the culture there, and it would have been so fascinating to hear what he might have said had he done so, because his other comments on America, I think, are uh, very, very astute in observing that this kind of melting pot, um, it has its upsides and its downsides. Like he does celebrate the way that it creates a sense of a people and a culture out of a mishmash where uh, it seems like an impossible task to get all these people to take common cause and to think of themselves with a sense of shared cultural identity. And America does achieve that, but it also achieves that with great loss. It achieves that by really knocking the stuffing out of any kind of identity that comes into that melting pot, right? It's
Right.
it's if you like, because we're talking about New Orleans, culinary analogies come to mind. It's the difference between just throwing a bunch of ingredients together and them all getting muddy such that you can't really taste any of them in any distinction, versus a really well composed dish where you can really sense the different notes. You can taste the savory and the sweet, and they don't just meld into something you know something monochromatic. uh so it represents, yeah, it represents a different approach to culture, and I think that that's an approach that you see why this is such a fascinating thing to study, is that if you can see it here, you'll probably begin to see it in other places in history and other places in the world as a Catholic difference, that a difference that the Catholic Church brings. Certainly in the way that the Reformation unfolded in Europe, you know, um, the Catholic Church was the one that stood, I would argue, for diversity and for liberal mindedness, as we've come to value it today.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Joe. And your point of how it finds expression in everything, including cuisine. And I mean, I know that we're supposed to be open minded in matters of taste, but is there a more unique cuisine in the lower 48 than that which you find in Louisiana? I I don't think there is.
No, I mean Cincinnati chili, but that's unique for a whole other reason. That's
I have to say, I stumbled on an article 2 or 3 days ago where they were ranking the happiest cities in the world, and it was some think tank in England. Now they among other things they said that Minneapolis is a happier city than San Diego. So I have no idea how they
well,
what the calculus was there. But
yeah.
they also said that Baltimore was a happier city than Rome. And I just thought, okay, well, this is what happens when you get a bunch of Englishmen who've been eating, overcooked beef and whatever else it is they eat in England.
Yeah.
And peace, your English listeners. But I'll take alligator.
Yeah, I also prefer. I think okra versus mushy peas any day.
Oh, I
Right?
love
That's a
I love fried okra.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's very good. Uh, well, Chris, I'm looking so much forward to this talk because again, I think
I am
just
too. I can't wait till it's finished.
I believe that, and it's it's an indication though, just this conversation we're having that you know like reading Chesterton, it's one of these things that it just opens doors. It opens so many doors for reflections and further conversation, and that's I've gotten the question a couple times about why what's on the calendar or what's on the schedule for this conference is on the schedule, and that's my best answer. Again, this is a topic which per se we don't know that Chesterton had any views on or any commentary on. What makes a Chestertonian, I think, is this quality of just inviting, first of all, inviting a Catholic ethos in talking about it and understanding it. It only really makes sense when viewed through the eyes of faith. That's one. But two, it just opens up all these other doors to conversation the way that reading Chesterton does, where you could be talking about anything in the world and all of a sudden you're talking about Christ and vice versa. So that's the wonderful part about it.
It is, as you say, Joseph, the only way for us to make sense of things, complete sense, is through the eyes of faith. Uh, I want to invite, especially people who've never been to a Chesterton conference. There are now, I think, three conferences that I go to, apart from the Catholic Answers one, that I truly love. One is Prairie Troubadours down in Fort Scott that Dan Kerr hosts, and the latest one that we just wrapped up, couple three or well, when a month or so ago in late February. What a collection of really, really wonderful people and
Mm-hmm.
a growing number of young people. And then the New Polity Conference in Steubenville that our friend Jacob Emam and Mark Barnes are doing, similar kind of crowd. But long before either of those, long before the Catholic Answers Conference, and we modeled a lot of the way our conference operates, if you will, on the Chesterton conference, with lots of time for conversation between talks and some maybe well-known speakers, and then some speakers that maybe you've never heard of, but really have some magnificent things to say. Um, Long before any of those, Dale was doing these conferences that just the single word that described them is also the single word that describes our Catholic faith, and it's joy. And it is 3 days, and I'll tell you, you're going to feel sad at the end of it. You are,
Mm-hmm.
because it's bittersweet to say goodbye to all these people, and it breaks my heart every time I have to say goodbye to Joe and my troubadour friends and the people that I run into at these things. But it's a glimpse of life on the other side of the veil. It absolutely is. And so if you've never been to one, yeah, they're going to be delightful talks, and please God, mine's one of them. But most of it is just the sheer joy you're going to have and the company of other people who love the work of Gilbert Keith Chesterton and love Jesus Christ and His church. And other than that, they don't fit in other. There's so many different categories that are represented.
That's right.
You'll have the freaky Birkenstock people, and then the pipe smokers, well, I guess then there's some people who do both and whatnot,
Yeah.
and then Joseph Pierce, who can put more stout away than anybody I've ever seen in my life, and get up the next day and do it again. So
Somehow, right?
yeah,
Yeah. Well, thank you for the endorsement. It really is. It's a special time, and you will be edified. You'll be inspired in your
and who
faith.
doesn't want to go to New Orleans in July?
Well, okay. So on that point, and I'll say this: when we were having our conference in Philadelphia last year, I had come up with the idea that I wanted to have it in New Orleans, and so I had on my phone, the weather app, the multi-city weather app, and I was checking the weather day by day against one another, and it was cooler and less humid in New Orleans all 3 days,
There you go.
um, when we were gathered in Philadelphia. So, you know, it there's the reputation. There's also air conditioning.
That's
So, you'll have some air
magnificent
conditioning.
city.
It
Uh,
is right on the Gulf of America too. I mean, what
yeah,
more could you?
right. New Orleans. What are the really, really, really beautiful cities in America? New Orleans, Santa Fe, San Francisco. But it is just a truly, truly beautiful city.
It is. Yeah. Well, yeah. So if you've never been to that, just for that alone, come to experience just a city which, as we've both raved, is sui generis here in the United States, but also a conference experience like you'll never forget. Chris, any last words of wisdom to share with our audience before we wrap up?
The name of the order is going to pop into my head as soon as the podcast is over. But the order of nuns, you can walk to where their monastery is, or their convent, who prayed before the Blessed. You can see the chapel where they prayed before the Blessed Sacrament during the Battle of New Orleans in the War of 1812. Um, they're not Bridgetines. What? Oh my gosh.
I'm
Anyway,
not
it'll come to
sure.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah. In any case, magnificent cathedral, lots of great Catholic buildings to see. But most of all, my friends, come for the company. And in this day and age, these kinds of things are especially necessary. Where, as Romano Guardini says, we're so far flung from the people to whom we're closest with. I know that's a truth of my life, even in my own family, and to be able to come and be in the company of Ursulines, the Ursuline convent. Thank you.
Okay.
To come and be in the company of other souls who love Jesus. It'll be very fortifying for you.
Very good. Well, thank you, Chris, for taking some time with us today.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, Joe.
And thank all of you in the audience, viewers, listeners. Do all the things that help us out to get this before other people. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Leave us a comment down below whether you plan to come or not. If the robots see that you're chatting on this video, it thinks, oh, it must be interesting content, and it shares it with other people. So do all those things to help us reach more and more folks and get them to come to New Orleans with us this summer. Because, as we like to say here on the podcast, Chesterton is always better with friends. Until next time, God bless.